So I think I recently saw a strong update that I think could maybe affect Zebec later on, maybe down the line, even though nothing I say is financial advice. And actually, it's regarding Chainlink and something called Canton. Now, how does this all even relate to something like Zebec, even though I'll talk about the price of ZBCN later, after I talk about this? Well, it's because, first of all, does anyone still remember something called Lattice, right? Which had a partnership with Zebec. However, keep in mind, Lattice is the first neobank built on Canton, allegedly. And if we take a look at it, Canton, people like to say, okay, who cares about that? But Canton, it's a public blockchain that's really focused on privacy. However, furthermore, they recently had something to do with Chainlink. What do I mean by this? Chainlink, it's such a massive project, by the way, that's focused on oracles primarily, and I'll explain that real quick after I talk about this, because Chainlink recently, they had an adoption update and they said that there was 16 integrations with the Chainlink standard across 6 services and 5 different chains, which one of them is something called Canton. And by the way, another one is called Arc. Arc is Circle's blockchain, and by the way, we saw Zebec not too long ago actually join the Arc testnet. Furthermore, Circle is a backer when it comes to Zebec, and they supposedly hold a big amount of ZBCN. But besides that point, I'm focusing on Canton here again. Canton, it was one of the things highlighted recently in Chainlink's adoption update. So let's just think about this, right? If let's say Chainlink, for whatever reason, had a lot of attention, and let's say it started flowing down to something like Canton, right? And maybe people take a look at, okay, Lattice, it's on Canton. What did that have a partnership with? Something like Zebec. Maybe it could trickle down from there. Now, people like to say it's a reach. This is too far-fetched, but we've seen it before. We've seen stuff like this happen before in a sense where I have not seen it directly with Zebec, but I've seen it with some other projects where they have a partnership, and then this partner does something with another partner, and then this one has a lot of attention, that it kind of trickles down to that, and then trickles down to the other. I've seen that in some cases. So is it too far-fetched to hypothetically reject the idea that this might not happen to Zebec as well? I don't think it's fair to reject it 100% because we've seen it happen in some cases before, especially during a hypothetical altcoin season. It's just we haven't seen an altcoin season right now. And keep in mind, Chainlink is a very popular project. It's very massive. It's top 20 in the world as we speak, right? In terms of market cap, Link, its native token within this space. So it's not a small project by any means. Keep in mind, why do I think Chainlink could become pretty popular and why that could maybe trickle down to Zebec? Well, it's because Chainlink, it's focused on something called oracles primarily, right? And Chainlink is very well known for its decentralized oracle network. Now, let me explain what an oracle is. An oracle, it's basically a data feed that brings data from off the chain, and this is basically called off-chain data, and it brings that over into the blockchain. The reason why this is important is because a lot of decentralized applications out there, they can't really function properly without this off-chain data. And because Chainlink has a very established presence, and because there are a lot of decentralized applications out there, naturally, we saw Chainlink become really popular, right? However, keep in mind, there is a use case for something like that. Now, Chainlink has other services too, like its proof of reserve services. It also has something called VRF, which stands for verifiable random function. Furthermore, there's also something called keepers, which, I've explained that before in my Chainlink videos, but it's not really that important for this video. The main thing is if Chainlink becomes popular and it starts trickling down to something like Canton and then Lattice, which is on Canton, maybe get some attention as a result of that, and it kind of flows into Zebec. Why not? That's the way you take a look at it. Zebec already has a partnership with Algorand, so it already has a lot of partnerships, and it's having more buckets, so to speak, right? More buckets to collect the raindrops. That's the way you take a look at it. The more buckets out there, the more rain collected, in theory, right? So the way you take a look at it is I like the avenues that Zebec has due to its extensive amount of partnerships. This is my point of view. So when people like to tell me, oh, ZBCN's around 47.5 times lower than 10 cents. Well, actually, it had a slight recovery, right? Because in my previous video, it was around 50 times. Now we've seen altcoins slightly recover. We've seen Bitcoin have a pretty slight recovery. So of course, naturally, we saw ZBCN move up a little bit, but it hasn't been anything that significant as of late. But still, at the end of the day, I mean, I still view ZBCN as being pretty relatively low in the grand scheme of things. So if I see something still kind of in those relatively speaking low ranges, yeah, I'll be dollar cost averaging. That's my mindset. Only once a month though. I'm not going to do any more than that. This is my mindset. However, at 10 cents, I mean, if we take a look at it, the market cap at that point would be around 9.8 billion. Now, people like to say, okay, that's a pretty massive market cap right there. Now, keep in mind, Zebec actually has something that could maybe reduce this required market cap, right? Which I've talked about in previous videos, but I just want to address this real quick because a lot of people like to tell me that, 9.8 billion seems like a massive market cap to have in order to hypothetically reach 10 cents. Does anyone remember, again, right, that Zebec recently had something showcasing its updated tokenomics, in which case it showed how the revenue collected from the Zebec programs, basically, it was going to be used to reacquire ZBCN, right? Now, in theory, what's going to happen as a result of that is the circulating supply could naturally reduce over time if, let's say, they do have more revenue. It doesn't mean they will, but if they do, that could reduce. How much? We'll wait and see, but I'm just saying, if the circulating supply were to reduce, in theory, the market cap needed to hypothetically attain 10 cents would also reduce, right? Because, again, if the circulating supply reduced, then the market cap needed to attain 10 cents would automatically, naturally also reduce. It's like, for instance, the circulating supply of ZBCN as of right now is around 98 billion. If it dropped to 96 billion, then the new market cap needed to attain 10 cents would be 9.6 billion approximately. So I think that's pretty cool. But even nonetheless, let's just assume like 9.8 billion in terms of the market cap that it would need to hypothetically attain 10 cents. I mean, it's still nothing like so outlandish, maybe, in my hypothetical perspective, because we've seen Shiba Inu pretty much exceed that market cap by around 30 billion back in 2021. So is this something so ridiculous? Yeah, maybe I don't think about it that way. I actually don't, but I'm just saying. So overall, when I take a look at Zebec, when I take a look at what they're doing, I just haven't given up. I'm still going to stay patient, I'm still going to hold, and that's about it. But I'll be sure to make more updates when it comes to Zebec because I'm still a fan. I mean, Zebec has an aspect of Solana, so as long as I like Solana and as long as I like Zebec, I'll still continue to hold, and I just don't want to give up. Keep in mind, we haven't really seen a narrative in such a massive way yet when it comes to utility-driven projects that have an aspect of Solana. We've seen that happen for the memes on Solana, but we haven't really seen that for the utility-driven projects for Solana, right? Like for instance, in the case of Render, which has an aspect of Solana, something like Pith, right? Which is actually, funnily enough, Pith is a competitor when it comes to Chainlink, even though it's way smaller, but I'm saying still. Also, we take a look at Zebec, amongst many others. We haven't really seen them have true mainstream attention, right? Because before, the mainstream attention was for memes that have an aspect of Solana. We've seen that narrative before. Could it happen again? Maybe. Who knows? But we've seen that before. What narrative haven't we seen? Utility-driven projects that have an aspect of Solana. In which case, Zebec is a utility-driven project that has an aspect of Solana, right? In addition to Solana Ventures actually being a backer when it comes to Zebec. But besides that, we haven't seen that narrative happen yet, right? But what happens if it does? What happens if during a hypothetical altcoin season, there is that narrative for utility-driven projects, again, that have an aspect of Solana, which I've said a bunch of times now, so probably going to stop saying that. But besides that, what happens if that becomes a narrative? Guess who's waiting there? Something like Zebec. Also Render, of course, Pith, but I'm saying Zebec's also waiting, right? It's waiting right there in the wings. If that wave were to arrive, it's waiting right there. It doesn't have to chase it later on. So I haven't given up. I'm still staying patient. However, I am not telling anyone to do anything. But I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you have a very nice day. It's been Lee the Captain, and hopefully I'll see y'all on the next one. I'm out. Peace. Bye.